Dog on a bone. I mean, he will not let go. He is never going to give up on this until Maduro's out of there. Maduro's taken on a terrible enemy in Donald Trump, and the president and his administration deserves tremendous credit. And the Maduro regime is not a government. They are a mafia.
Senator Rubio this morning tipping his hat to the president for his handling of Venezuela as the Maduro regime detains and then releases an American journalist. Cody Weddle was in Venezuela covering Juan Guaido's return. Joining us now, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Governor Bill Richardson. Governor, thank you and appreciate your time this morning. That American journalist, his last on-air report was Monday, and he was detailing Guaido's return. After defying the travel ban there, he tweeted out, which was his last tweet before he was detained, he had called Guaido's return triumphant. A couple big developments happening in Venezuela as the crisis there continues. Your thoughts this morning, sir?
Well, look, I think we're taking the right position, backing Guaido, insisting that this journalist be freed. Maduro is in trouble. There's no question. We're on the right side. My worry, Sandra, is that we need a diplomatic strategy that leads to free and fair elections, supervised by international observers. And the key is the Venezuelan military. The problem is they are still backing Maduro. And, Maduro's been in for close to 10 years. He's pretty resilient. So there's a humanitarian crisis, too, of food and medicine that needs to get to the Venezuelan people. So I support the administration's policy on Guaido, but I think we need a diplomatic strategy, not just sanctions, not just, all kinds of aggressive action. I think we got to get the Pope involved. I think we got to get the UN involved. I think we got to bring Cuba, who backs Maduro, into some kind of diplomatic solution. That's my only worry, that we don't have a strategy accompanying the right position we've taken so far.
They say they have a strategy. Here's Vice President Mike Pence speaking very strongly on this yesterday. We don't have the sound on it? All right. So he is saying we're making it clear to leaders around the world there can be no bystanders in the struggle of Venezuela's freedom. The U.S. calls on every nation on earth to recognize Juan Guaido as Venezuela's president and take the side of freedom. And by the way, this is as John Bolton, the president's national security advisor, is calling on further sanctions. We know that he is putting foreign banks, quote, on notice. Governor, are you suggesting that these sanctions aren't working to put the pressure on Maduro?
Well, no, he's still in power. I'm for the sanctions, and I'm for the strategy, which I think it's over 50 countries are backing Guaido. I'm okay with that. But I think there's got to be an end game, because Maduro is sticking with the Venezuelan military. He's still there. He is defiant. There's a humanitarian crisis. I just don't think sanctions alone, a tough policy, is going to work without a diplomatic strategy that leads to elections and possibly getting Maduro out. That's my only point.
All right. You obviously have your concerns there. As far as North Korea is concerned, here's Ambassador Bolton, the president's national security advisor, on the latest there.
I think the North Koreans obviously would like to give up as little of their nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons and ballistic missile programs as they could. The president wasn't buying it. He said, look, we want a big deal. We want the big deal that will give North Korea a bright future, but which results in complete denuclearization. But he thinks the deal is there if North Korea is prepared to look at the big picture.
And now these new reports of new satellite images coming out of North Korea, possibly suggesting that Kim Jong-un is actually ramping up his nuclear program. What happens next with all of this, Governor?
Well, I believe that both sides need to reassess their position. We need a diplomatic, again, and a strategy on the next steps. We shouldn't abandon just because this summit went bad, and it was a setback for both leaders. I think the North Koreans may be reshuffling their nuclear negotiating leadership. That's good. On this step that they've taken, I've noticed them in the past in negotiating, they ramp up to get more leverage in future negotiations.
Interesting.
I think we need to concentrate on letting our people.
I'm sorry to cut you off there, but we're running out of time. So are you hopeful, like the administration is, Governor, that a deal will eventually get done and another summit will take place and this will continue?
I do think that some kind of agreement will be reached, not a complete denuclearization, but it should be at lower levels, the negotiators, not the president. The president should not go into another summit like he did this last time.
Governor Richardson, great to get your thoughts on all of that this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stunning development, the corruption case against the former Republican Congressman Aaron Schock. Federal prosecutors dropping the charges against him after he promised to repay taxes and campaign committees. Schock saying there's no doubt prosecutors targeted him. You don't hear about this all the time. Charges have been dropped. Leland Vittert live in D.C. to pick up the story from there. Hey, Leland, good morning.
Oh, good morning to you, Bill. You said stunning, shocking turn of events would be right. Pick your adjective. Prosecutors saying that the payback agreement, as they have now looked at these alleged crimes, is fair and just. This is a far cry from the years in prison Schock faced on multiple charges for wire and mail fraud. The original charging affidavit read like a political thriller, using campaign funds and even government funds for a series of expenditures, including redecorating his office to be like the TV series Downton Abbey, traveling to get haircuts, private jets, flipping tickets to the Super Bowl and World Series at a profit, but not reporting the income. Now, all he has to do is pay back about $68,000, stay out of trouble for 6 months, and reach a settlement with the IRS. With that, he is off scot-free. And as his lawyer pointed out, he did not plead guilty to a single crime. Here's Schock yesterday.
I think it became very obvious to all of us that he saw me as his ticket to stardom. And I know for a fact that shortly after he indicted me, he began lobbying some of my former colleagues to become the next U.S. attorney. And so it becomes very obvious that there were political colors to this case.
You know, you might remember Schock became a rising star in Congress at the age of 27. Obviously, those federal charges derailed his meteoric career. But for a while now, he says, Bill, he's not going to rule out running for office again. Well, stay tuned.
Amazing turn of events here. Leland, thank you. As you point out there, later today, Aaron Schock will join us live. He's the former Illinois congressman to explain his case. And as we pointed out a moment ago, doesn't always happen this way. So we'll figure out why. All right, that's coming up 20 minutes now before the hour.
The White House calling out Democrats in the battle over border security.
The president was elected to do exactly what he's doing. Democrats should actually focus on doing their job, not just attacking somebody. People didn't just elect them to come up here and complain. They elected them to come up here and deliver results.
The issue dividing the GOP as a Senate vote looms. So will Republicans
67 votes in the Senate, 285 or 290 in the House, depending on who shows up. So the president's won. And when he goes to court, he'll win because the court will say Congress did act, but they couldn't override his veto. So I feel good about what he's doing legally, and I feel like the crisis is real, and he's going to win.
Senator Lindsey Graham there making the case for the president's national emergency declaration. President Trump urging Republicans to stay united ahead of a Senate vote to block it. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican chair of the Homeland Security Committee. How you doing, sir? And good morning to you. I'm seeing as many as 15 Republican senators might vote against the president on this measure. They're making the case, go ahead and take away the emergency declaration. You got a pile of $6 billion, which is more than you wanted originally for the wall. Do you think he's going to take that deal and back down off of that, Senator?
I think there are other reasons why he wants the emergency powers. And, you know, prior Congresses have given any president this authority to act under the National Emergency Act. This president's maybe expanding it, but he has the authority. And Congress has also given him the discretion in these appropriation bills. So I think he's definitely operating within his legal bounds. And from my standpoint, what I hope the Republican Senate does is not give Nancy Pelosi ball control of the United States Senate, but we should come up with our own piece of legislation that basically states what our position is. Republicans in the Senate support building the wall. We want to secure our border. We support the president on that. And to the extent that if we don't like the fact that prior Congresses had given him this authority, or any president this authority under the National Emergency Act. Let's change that act. Mike Lee's going to have a bill that I'm co-sponsoring today that does just that. So that's the more appropriate way of doing this, as opposed to voting for Nancy Pelosi's resolution. That doesn't make any sense to me as a Republican in the United States Senate.
You're working against the clock on that, you know. There has to be a vote in this resolution based on law.
Yeah, I think this is pretty simple, Bill. We just come up with our own piece of legislation. We can change the National Emergency Act to return some of this power back to Congress, and we can also appropriate the funds in that same piece of legislation. Now, is anything going to become law? No. Nancy Pelosi's resolution won't become law. Ours probably won't. But a piece of legislation we would pass would be the better piece of legislation.
Okay, interesting. Here's the president from yesterday. He's got a message for Democrats and Republicans in Congress.
I think that really it's a very dangerous thing for people to be voting against border security for anybody, including Republicans. I really think that Republicans that vote against border security and the wall, I think, you know, I've been okay at predicting things. I think they put themselves at great jeopardy.
Check that clearly from Hanoi last week. Here's the tweet from the president now. More recent. Senate Republicans are not voting on constitutionality or precedent. They are voting on desperately needed border security and the wall. Our country is being invaded with drugs, human traffickers, and criminals of all shapes and sizes. That's what this vote is all about. Stay united. Easier said than done?
Well, it is a political vote. We already know that Nancy Pelosi does not have the votes to override a veto, so it's a moot point. So from my standpoint, we should support the president. We do have a crisis at the border. In 2014, President Obama said it was a humanitarian crisis when 120,000 unaccompanied children and people coming in as families across the border illegally and were apprehended. Last year, 145,000 people came in illegally under those same categories. In 5 months, Bill, 159,000 unaccompanied children and family members have come to this country illegally. This is a growing crisis. It's not going away. 159,000 in 5 months versus 120,000 in a year when President Obama called it a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis. It is an emergency. And Democrats have their heads so far in the sand when they say this is manufactured. This is a real crisis. It's beyond anything we've seen in the past. These are individuals that are coming here exploiting our laws, and they are staying, unlike what was happening earlier in the few decades in the 2000s when it was Mexican economic migrants that we could return immediately. They would sometimes be apprehended multiple times. So Democrats are comparing apples to oranges. This is a crisis. It is an emergency.
He's concerned about the unity, so we'll see whether or not it happens. Sir, thank you. Controversial remarks by Ilhan Omar, the Minnesota Democrat, a freshman, suggesting that some of her colleagues are more loyal to Israel than the United States. Reaction from both sides continues to come in. Here's Newt Gingrich from last hour.
I think the pressure keeps building, and I think at some point the Democrats will hope that it goes away, but I think it won't go away, and eventually they'll have to vote to, at a minimum, rebuke her, and at a maximum take her off the Foreign Relations Committee.
I know that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar really tries to push back against oppression. And as a Palestinian, I can tell you, when she speaks about those issues, what I hear is her trying to uplift my grandmother in Palestine, in the West Bank, and saying that there are real, actual, factual evidence to show that there's human rights violations.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel picks it up from there. Another day on the Hill there for you, Mike. What's happening? Good morning.
Bill, Sandra, good morning to you. Some Republicans say this struggle suggests just how far left Democrats have gone.
This is not your father's Democratic Party. If it was ever more obvious than today, I don't know when it was more obvious. They can't agree to condemn anti-Semitism.
Freshman Democrat Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has been a lightning rod after saying support for Israel is all about the Benjamins, a reference to $100 bills. Then she suggested colleagues who support Israel are pledging allegiance to another country. That has hit a nerve with many of her fellow lawmakers.
I know what I feel about what was said, and that's what I can speak to. It's unacceptable. Questioning anyone's loyalty in Congress to the United States of America and because of their faith is unacceptable. And we just have to make sure that people understand in this country that there's no room for it in our rhetoric.
But fellow freshman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been tweeting her support, writing, "None of this is whataboutism. Racism and bigotry of all forms is inextricably linked. When you don't address them as a system and attempt to pick them apart as though they are distinct and separable issues, eventually the thing that gets advanced is white supremacy and classism." Republicans say it isn't complicated.
Send the message. Anti-Semitism is not allowed. Anybody who speaks it, anybody who believes in it, needs to be called out and shouldn't be in any party, Democrat or Republican.
Some Democrats say Republican leaders should back off.
It is incredibly detrimental to the cause of fighting such a scourge that someone would seek to, in fact, politically capitalize on this terrible trend and increase that we've seen throughout some of our communities.
A senior Democratic source tells me the resolution is expected to be introduced in the next hour or two. I'm told it is still being finalized, and Democratic leaders are hoping that they'll be able to vote on it today. Bill,
we shall see. Thank you, Mike Emanuel on the Hill. We'll watch it from there. Thank you. Meanwhile, the Attorney General, William Barr, holding his first news conference about an hour from now as we learn some new information in the case of Michael Cohen, whether or not he lied about requesting a pardon from President Trump. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is on that story. Was he caught red-handed, Catherine? Good morning.
Well, I'll get to that in just 1 second, Bill. As you mentioned, an hour from now, we are expecting a news event from Attorney General Barr. It's going to focus on elder abuse, we understand, in the recent case of former FBI and CIA Director William Webster and phone scams. Now, we're also learning new information this morning about the records Michael Cohen provided to House investigators about his congressional testimony involving a 2016 Moscow real estate project. The records that include edits by the president's lawyers show that the original date in the original draft by Cohen was January 2016, and that undercuts allegations that the president's lawyers made edits to alter the failed negotiations timeline. As you know, Bill, Cohen acknowledged in a guilty plea last year that he misled lawmakers in 2017 by saying he had abandoned the project a year earlier when, in fact, he pursued it for months after January as Trump campaigned for the presidency. Here's what Cohen said publicly last week.
Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow Tower negotiations before I gave it. So to be clear, Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it.
On the possibility of a presidential pardon, Cohen's new lawyer, Lanny Davis, said, quote, prior to Michael Cohen's decision to leave the Joint Defense Group and tell the truth on July 2nd, 2018, Michael was open to the ongoing dangling of a possible pardon by Trump representatives privately and in the media. During that time period, he directed his attorney to explore possibilities of a pardon. This morning, the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is pushing back on that statement, pointing to what he described as more inconsistencies in Cohen's testimony. And there were also new questions this morning about contact between Congressman Adam Schiff's staff and Cohen. Sources tell Fox News there were at least 4 meetings totaling 12 hours before last week's public hearing from Cohen, and a House Republican is now questioning whether so-called logistical planning for the hearing really crossed the line into coaching Cohen. Bill.
Thank you, Catherine. Catherine Herridge.
You're
a lot
welcome.
more coming up on that now.
Thanks, Catherine. For more on all this, let's bring in our A-team. Here they are. Mark Lauder, Trump 2020 Director of Strategic Communications, Richard Fowler, Fox News contributor, and David Drucker, Senior Political Correspondent for the Washington Examiner, our A-team this morning. Welcome.
Good to see you, gentlemen.
So, possibly contradicting his own testimony, Michael Cohen, where do you see this going? Mark, to you first.
It's hard to keep up with the amount of lies. I mean, he didn't want a job at the White House, and even another network had to admit their reporting showed he did. He didn't have his testimony, or he did have his testimony edited, but it wasn't really edited. He didn't want a pardon. He did want a pardon about the only things I think Michael Cohen told the truth about were his name, he's going to prison, and that there was no collusion.
Well, here is the statement he made 8 days ago before that committee on the Hill. Watch here.
The pain that I have caused my family and my friends, nothing can do that. And I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
So now apparently that's not the case. Rudy Giuliani last hour sends this out. Dem star Cohen testified, never asked for a pardon from Mr. Trump. His lawyer, Lanny Davis, has said he directed his attorney to explore a pardon. Never means never, ever, not after July 2, 2018, which is the latest deception. Another perjury and more prison. It is not often where 8 days later, Richard, you can look back at this and say, Was this guy just flat out lying?
Listen, Michael Cohen.
And if Lanny Davis is the one who brought him to lawmakers on Capitol Hill and knew about his opening statement, how do you allow that line to be in your sworn deposition?
Listen, Michael Cohen's no Boy Scout. Michael Cohen is a liar. Michael Cohen is a fool. All self-admitted. I think here's the holes that the Republicans have a problem with. Here's the holes for the White House. In this testimony, Michael Cohen presents some evidence, right? He presents this $35,000 check that was signed by the president while he was still president of the United States. Remember, Donald Trump has said over and over and over again that he just did minor work for me. He was a small-time attorney, not much to see here. So why is it that you're paying a small-time attorney with not much to see here $35,000 from the Oval Office? That is a big question.
This is your star witness. And how do we look at this now, David?
I don't really think you look at it too much differently. Everybody knew Michael Cohen was a liar. And so the case that Democrats are trying to make against President Trump doesn't really rely on the fact that he is honest and the fact that they're trying to dispel this notion that President Trump doesn't have a whole bunch of skeletons in a very open closet. I think that there are two things here. This is all going to rise and fall on how voters feel about President Trump, knowing what they already know, because what Michael Cohen has been saying, even if we accept it all at face value, is stuff that most voters, even voters that like President Trump, already think. And there's one other thing I'd say about all of this Cohen stuff going on. In the midst of whatever lies he is still telling, he is giving House investigators, Democrats, a lot of information. And if you look back at the Benghazi hearings, one of the reasons the Benghazi investigation was such a big deal is because in looking at what Hillary Clinton did in reaction to and during the Benghazi terrorist attacks, they looked into 15,000 pages of documents where they found this email address they'd never seen before. And that email address led Republicans to her private server, which probably cost her the presidency. So my point is here, there's a lot going on that Democrats are doing that once you get through all of this mess with Cohen and whether or not you can believe him, might be a whole bunch of information that later is useful.
Could be, but just getting back to Cohen, doesn't it just impugn your case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he just keeps undermining himself every day. We learn new information, new factual problems. And let's also not forget, this is a man who was so desperate, he pled guilty to something that two former FEC commissioners say wasn't even a crime.
Right. But here lies another problem. And I think my mother says, and I think a lot of mothers say to their children, you know who you are by the friends you keep. And the fact that Donald Trump kept Michael Cohen around for 10 years speaks to the president's character.
That's not the point of this discussion.
But I think it is the point of the discussion. That's how voters are looking at Michael Cohen.
He may have been caught red-handed in another lie.
No, and you make a very good point, but I think the question is, do voters and the American people look at President Trump differently because Michael Cohen's lying again? I think the opinions of President Trump are fixed. They will choose in 2020 based on his performance and who they have to vote for instead. And the fact that Michael Cohen is lying yet again, I don't think will change how voters view President Trump.
Meanwhile, what is happening within your own party this morning, Richard? We've got some breaking news just coming into us right now that the House will consider this updated anti-Semitism resolution today. We know that there was some changes being made to the original language of that to more of an anti-hate message within that. So we'll see what happens there. Marco Rubio was speaking out about what is happening on the left this morning in regards to that. Listen.
I mean, look what's happening in the House now with the whole anti-Semitism thing, you know, and all of a sudden everybody is running for the hills on it and they don't want to take a vote on it because there's this new element, radical element that's gone into the Democratic Party that's moved them away from supporting Israel.
So we're also hearing that the final text of that resolution will be posted within the hour. So we'll see exactly what that looks like, Richard. But meanwhile, what is happening here?
Well, listen, I think anti-Semitism and hate exists on both sides of the aisle. I've said this multiple times. I'll say it again. I do think that Congresswoman Omar should not have made the Benjamin comment. She should apologize for that. But I think that we have a larger problem in this country, that somebody's American, how American they are is defined by how they feel about another country and how our foreign policy happens. And I think that is what the larger question is, right? And I think our Americanism should be defined by how we treat our neighbors. neighbors, right? And when I say how with your neighbors, that's how we love our neighbors, right? And when I say our neighbors, I mean very broadly. And when I mean our neighbors, I mean how they love, how they worship, how they pray. And that is, I think, the larger question that we have to ask ourselves. And are we really saying that your Americanism is judged by how we conduct our foreign policy?
You could pass a second resolution that shows love for every human being in the world. But this resolution deals specifically with the comments you made about Israel.
And this is not just about the comments of a freshman congresswoman. Let's not forget, this is the party of Louis Farrakhan. This is the party of Barack Obama, who was widely and correctly called the most anti-Israel president in U.S. history. Gave $150 billion to Iran, who pledges to destroy Israel.
No, Mark, this is a huge
problem in the Democrat Party that is surfacing because of those comments.
Look, there's nothing wrong with criticizing Israel. There's nothing wrong with criticizing U.S. policy toward Israel. When you talk about lawmakers being bought off and start making accusations of dual loyalty, that's where there's a problem. President Obama, you may not have liked his policy toward Israel. It never got into any of that. And the problem Democrats are having is they're unwilling to police their own. There's been a lot of criticism of President Trump and Republicans in the House for years for failing to police their own, saying things that were racially racist or insensitive. Pick your term. And now the shoe's on the other foot, and Democrats are unwilling to police their own. They're having a huge problem because of where the progressive base is. All you have to say is criticize Israel, criticize U.S. policy toward Israel. Don't accuse people of dual loyalty and being bought off, and this could go away. And if they pass a resolution...
Richard, wait, hold on. I'll let you react to that in a minute, but I want to get this Wall Street Journal op-ed in here because it was fascinating this morning on Speaker Cortez. The Journal editorial board writing the most important question after this moral fiasco. Maybe who's really the Speaker of the House, Ms. Pelosi or the young radicals led by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez?
The Speaker of the House is clearly Nancy Pelosi, and I think I'm exactly where David is. You can criticize somebody's foreign policy, but once again, like I said, she should apologize for the Benjamin's comment. And to make this argument that we're the party of Louis Farrakhan would be the same as making the argument that you guys are the party of David Duke, and I would never make that argument, so don't make that argument about the Democratic Party, number one. And I think number two, this resolution speaks about hate generally, because as much as we should criticize anti-Semitism, we should also criticize Islamophobia.
We don't know yet. It's not out yet. We haven't seen it yet.
It shouldn't have been this hard to condemn anti-Semitism.
Well, you know, on their first go-around, they responded very forcefully and clear. On this second go-around, you've seen more of a fraying of Democrats, both in the House and on the campaign trail. And I think they have to figure out where they want to be on this, or it's going to make them harder in 2020 to make the case that President Trump is one way that you don't like, but we are different.
Back to this Wall Street Journal piece. Here's the headline. House leaders seem to be afraid of the radical backbenchers. Mark, you have a case here. You have 3 freshman Democratic members of Congress who seem to be calling a lot of the shots for their party. And you can reflect on the Tea Party movement or the House Freedom Caucus, but they have shown that they are willing to speak out about anything at any time. And if you watch Peter Doocy's attempted interview yesterday with Ilhan Omar, I mean, he walked with her for 5 minutes and asked her repeatedly whether or not she would go ahead and sign up to this anti-Semitism resolution. And she failed to answer the question. It could have been as simple as a no, and you did not get that from her. These 3 women are driving much of the agenda for Nancy Pelosi.
And when you look at it in broader terms, it's not just them. I mean, you have some of their leading candidates for president that are backing them in many of their, whether it's the Green New Deal, whether it is even in condemning, they refuse to condemn Congresswoman Omar. So the leaders of the party now are these 3 and the presidential candidates that are going along with them.
What's unfortunate here is that we're not focusing on members of Congress who are actually going to Congress to do real work, like Lauren Underwood, who was amazing in her questioning against Secretary Nielsen yesterday, or Jennifer Wexton, who is working very hard to deal with prescription drugs.
Are you suggesting this isn't an important issue?
No, I'm suggesting that we have over 200 members of Congress who are doing real work every day, and we're focusing on these three members of Congress, and that's unfortunate.
They're getting most of the oxygen in the room. We can see that every day.
But there's people actually passing bills and doing real work.
They are giving voice to where a lot of the progressive base is, just like past conservative insurgents did the same on the right. And the Democrats are going to have to figure out how to come together, or a lot of the new members that have a lot of potential from these swing districts that you're talking about are going to be ignored.
Look, we'll know where everybody stands today in the House, that is, because Majority Whip Steny Hoyer says when asked, yes, probably there will be a vote on this resolution in the House today. So we were arrested yesterday after failing to pay his ex-wife more than $160,000 in child support. Kelly was bailed out just last week after being charged with multiple counts of sexual abuse. The Grammy winner sitting for a very fiery interview with CBS's Gayle King.
How can I pay child support? How? If my ex-wife is destroying my name and I can't work, how can I work? How can I get paid? How can I take care of my kids? How?
Your ex-wife
Use your common sense.
Your ex-wife says you abused her, Robert. Is she not telling the truth?
Absolutely. She's not telling the truth. I love her to death. I have nothing against her still. That is my kid's mother.
Kelly is charged with sexually abusing 4 women. 3 were underage at the time. He was pleading not guilty to those crimes.
The DNC, Democratic National Committee, refusing to allow Fox News to host any of the 2020 primary debates.
Fox media analyst Howie Kurtz joins us now. Howie, what do you think about this decision?
Well, I'm not surprised by this move by DNC Chairman Tom Perez. Fox also didn't get a Democratic debate in 2016. But I believe, and many prominent journalists are writing, that this is a missed opportunity for the Democratic Party and the candidates to reach a broader audience. That's why I believe Tom Perez is using the New Yorker story that recently came out, very critical of Fox News, as a fig leaf. Now, let's look at the company's response. We can put it up. Senior Vice President Bill Salmon saying, "We hope the DNC will reconsider its decision to bar Chris Wallace, Brett Baier, and Martha MacCallum, all of whom embody the ultimate journalistic integrity and professionalism from moderating a Democratic presidential debate. They're the best debate team in the business." President Trump also weighing in on Twitter. He writes, "Democrats just block Fox News from holding a debate. Good. Then I think I'll do the same thing with the fake news networks and the radical left Democrats in the general election debates." That's a typical shot by the president. I don't think it's particularly helpful to this company at a time when critics are saying there's a cozy relationship between Fox and the president.
So, Howie, what is the DNC saying prompted this decision?
DNC says it's this 11,000-word New Yorker piece, highly critical of Fox. I think the New Yorker story is deeply flawed. I'll get into that in a second. But it makes some fair points that have been kicking around for a long time that I've covered along with countless others. For example, Fox's primetime host, the opinion people, are largely supportive of President Trump, but not always, as we saw when they slammed the president over immigration before the government shutdown. President Trump does watch an awful lot of Fox News and is influenced by it. You can tell that from his Twitter feed. A number of people who had roles at Fox, most notably Bill Shine, former co-president, have gone to work at the White House, by the way. A couple dozen journalists went to work for the Obama administration. But here's the thing. In that 11,000 plus words in the New Yorker piece, what wasn't mentioned is that Fox has a very professional and very solid news division.
Yeah. You want to reach the middle. You want to reach as many people as possible. This primary season is going to go on for a long time, Howie. My sense is there's time to revisit this decision, much like the Amazon decision of New York City. What do you think of that?
Well, maybe the DNC will reconsider, because it's not just Fox objecting to this, but people from a lot of prominent news organizations. But I do want to just make this point about the news division. And that is, you know, the primetime opinion people and Fox and Friends, I mean, they get a lot of the attention. I understand that. But there are an awful lot of people at this company. Brett and Martha, remember Martha MacCallum's grilling of Brett Kavanaugh when he gave the only interview as a Supreme Court nominee, and John Roberts and Jillian Turner and Mike Emanuel and Bill Hemmer and Sandra Smith and others who are journalists who try to play things right down the middle. It'd be like writing a whole piece saying the New York Times is an anti-Trump newspaper and mostly quoting from the editorial page. And so finally, I think that, you know, you take the Michael Cohen hearings, the Mueller probe, the hush money investigation, all of those have been covered pretty fully and pretty fairly by the news division. Opinion people are something else, but that is the distinction I think that I want to make, and that I think that the magazine article
strong statement from Bill Salmon too. Thank you, Howie. We'll see where it leads. Howard Kurtz.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
In the meantime, Republicans have not been shy about their opinions when it comes to the investigations into the White House.
The curtain opened up and we found out what was really going on. No, we want to damage the president. We're going to have plenty of theatrics. Bring your popcorn. I'm thinking about maybe we just set up a popcorn machine in the back, because that's what this is becoming. It's becoming a show.
We might need some butter and some salt for that, huh? What do you think? That's Doug Collins. He's going to join us in a moment. His reaction to everything else that has happened this week. That's coming up shortly here on America's Newsroom. Also, Sandra?
Plus, Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib saying she plans to get the ball moving on impeaching the president. So how will that affect the work Congress should be doing? Congressman Doug Collins is our headliner this morning. We will speak with him next.
I think every single colleague of mine agrees.
10:30 here in New York, House Democrats launching sweeping investigations into nearly every facet of President Trump's life, both before and after the inauguration. House Judiciary Chair Jerry Nadler spearheading much of that effort. His counterpart of the panel is the ranking member, our headliner today, Georgia Republican Doug Collins. Sir, how you doing? And good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Some are encouraging caution on this. Others are saying, let's go for it. What do you think they do?
They're going to choose the path of going forward with no idea where they're going. They remind me of a teenager who just got in front of and behind the wheel of a car, not really sure, but they know the gas pedal works, and that's what they're doing. Eventually, they're going to have to figure out that the brake actually works too. It's not helpful to anything we're going through right now. And what they're saying is they have a conclusions of what they want, and now they're having to go find their facts to get there.
And as far as introducing articles of impeachment and the move that we are seeing in that direction on the left, here's Congresswoman Tlaib on that yesterday. Number 4.
Remember, this is setting a precedent. If we don't hold impeachment proceedings today, start them today and hold him accountable to following the United States Constitution, think about that. This is not going to be the last CEO that runs for president of the United States. This is not going to be the last person that tries to get away with this. And what does that say about the most powerful, most important most important position in the world?
How will this work out for them, Congressman?
I think it's going to work out badly because the American people are seeing that they're just going to the extremes. So what's really interesting, 2 points of what she just said is number one, we have to start impeachment now. I'm glad to see she has Mr. Steyer's talking points because that's exactly what he's been saying since November of 2016. But then she also, if you notice there was also an attack on anybody who's been a successful business person because she said somebody else may get there. And that's just a subtle attack, on anyone that doesn't fit their mold of what public service ought to look like. And when we understand what's going on here, we understand the vast political pressure. Look, all of their leadership, including Chairman Nadler, even Ms. Pelosi and others have said, we don't have information enough for the impeachment process. We don't know of anything, but yet you have members undoubtedly who have this vast amount of knowledge on things that even their leadership don't have. It's not going to play well. The American people see what's going on. They're just overplaying their hand as usual, and it's going to play in badly. We're just going to keep focusing on the truth.
Her exact words, this is not going to be the last CEO that runs for president of the United States, as you point out there. On Michael Cohen, there was news on him today. It broke overnight. Did he lie before that committee 8 days ago?
It sure seems that way, and that's why my colleagues Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows referred that for perjury. This is a man who is just probably from an old background of mine from being an attorney. Is sometimes your best bet is just to be quiet. Sometimes your best bet to not continually bring up things that in the end are contradiction your own statements. Your best bet is instead of to try and either make a name for yourself, do something before you go to jail, is sometimes you just need to be quiet. What Michael Cohen is doing is just trying to spread as much pain as he possibly can, because he obviously doesn't understand his own situation, and he's just flashing out at the world. And this is unfortunate to see this actually play out the way it is.
So Lanny Davis, his attorney, he was sitting behind Michael Cohen last week. He ushered him through Congress, right, before that hearing. He put out a long statement. This is just part of it now, okay? Prior to Michael Cohen's decision to leave the Joint Defense Group, he writes, and tell the truth, on July 2, 2018, Michael was open to the ongoing dangling of a possible pardon by Trump representatives privately and in the media. During that time period, he directed his attorney to explore possibilities of a pardon. I've gone through that statement. I don't hear Lanny Davis say this is not true. Do you?
No, I do not. This is the problem that Michael Cohen needed. Michael Cohen needed an attorney, not a publicity agent. He had a publicity agent in Lanny Davis who was trying to recreate his own fame and career by marching this through and working with the Democrats to bring him forward. Mr. Cohen needed an actual attorney. Obviously, he was let down by this. Maybe he needs to check into that.
That's his call.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing here. Think about it. This is an attorney who should be there helping you, but yet at the same very point in time, he doesn't deny what's happening. He doesn't step forward and say, think about what you're saying. And it just seems like, again, Lanny Davis orchestrated a media event instead of actually being the attorney that he claimed to be. This is how far out of field this has gotten when you understand that they've lost track of what they're trying to do because they're so desperate to find something to stick on this president that they're willing to try anything possible. American people see through that, and frankly, the Democrats that I privately talk to are becoming more and more concerned that they've lost complete messaging. I was just listening to an interview being done up here on the Hill, and there were a Democrat complaining about the fact that nobody's talking about the fact that they passed a very bad gun bill or that they're working on destroying our election system. They're upset because they're having to deal with all this other stuff. So this is a bad place for them.
Meanwhile, a fiery hearing on Capitol Hill yesterday where we saw the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen testifying before Congress, really describing a situation that she says is only getting worse, on pace for 1 million illegal border crossings this year. She laid that out. SOT number 6, here she is describing just how bad it's gotten at our southern border.
Today's migrant flows have created a humanitarian catastrophe. In one study, more than 30% of women reported sexual assault along the way, and 70% of all migrants reported experiencing violence.
Did she make any ground making the administration's case in that hearing room yesterday, Congressman?
I believe she did. When you start seeing headlines on the Washington Post, the New York Times, not conservative groups that are saying the exact same thing, that this border crisis is escalating, I find it hard to believe that there's any United States senator who would vote to approve this resolution of disapproval for building our border wall when the case is being made that there is an emergency at the border. The president is making that case. Secretary Nielsen made that case yesterday. And for them to actually say there's not a crisis, or they try to focus the attention on it might be not constitutional, which is not true. It is by statute he can do this. They're doing the American people a disservice. She's making the case. People are understanding. People back home in my district and people I talk to understand that you can't have an open border and not experience the consequences of that open border.
Sir, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming on, and we'll speak again, okay?
I look forward to that. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks for being our headliner. You bet. You too.
I think we're taking the right position, backing Guaido. Maduro is in trouble. There's no question. We're on the right side. We need a diplomatic strategy that leads to free and fair elections, supervised by international observers.
Former Ambassador Bill Richardson there. The Maduro regime in Venezuela facing growing international pressure to step aside. Meanwhile, the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, is now back in the country calling for more demonstrations. Rich Edson's live at the State Department with the latest on all of this. Rich, good morning.
Now, good morning, Sandra. And now the administration is calling on every nation to join the United States and more than 50 other countries and recognize Juan Guaido as a legitimate leader of Venezuela. However, Nicolas Maduro is still in Venezuela, has the backing of China, Russia, and Cuba. A Senate Foreign Relations subcommittee has just opened up a hearing on the path to democracy in Venezuela with the administration's Venezuela envoy, Elliot Abrams, and the USAID Administrator, Mark Green. They're testifying on how they plan to achieve a transition of power and address a multi-year economic and humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. The Trump administration has sanctioned top Maduro officials and the state oil company and is threatening to punish international banks that work with the Maduro regime. The subcommittee's chairman says eventually the Maduro regime will collapse under this pressure.
Let me tell you this, every single prominent official in Venezuela, with the absence of Maduro, has reached out to somebody looking for a deal. That is a fact. That they haven't taken one yet doesn't mean they won't at some point. These are not good people. They're thieves, they're liars, they're crooks, and ultimately they'll turn on each other.
The Maduro regime is also reportedly deporting an American journalist who was living and working in Venezuela. Authorities arrested Cody Weddle after he covered what he described earlier this week, Guaido's triumphant return to Caracas. The State Department had said yesterday that it demanded its release and wanted him released unharmed. The department has not yet commented on his reported deportation. Sandra, back to you.
Rich Edson at the State Department. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich. Meanwhile now, less than an hour, House Democrats will be introduced. Analysts here to look at the latest in this case. Cabot, I want to start with you. What does this say, or maybe what does it expose about freedom of speech on college campuses today, Cabot?
Well, it's encouraging that hopefully there will be some justice, that there has been legal recourse taken. And it's sad that that's surprising, because for so many instances there is violence against conservatives that goes without consequences, without accountability. And I think it shows how important it is for when these incidents do take place to gather evidence and hold people's feet to the fire. Many universities around the country, when instances like this happen, they kind of sit back, they wait to see if people are paying attention, waiting to see if people are going to jump on and say there needs to be legal action taken against these people. And so it's sad that the environment has been created now where a lot of people are paying attention and saying, can I continue to use violence and threats of violence to suppress conservative ideas on campus? And when you don't take action against people that do, it incentivizes people to do that in the future. And I think that's what led to this happening in the first place, is that environment that's been created.
There is a lot of outrage over this. And Cabot, what you point out is that what makes this case so different, Mercedes, I'll bring you in on the legal angle of this, is that it's all caught on tape.
Oh, absolutely.
And here's the defense attorney on due process, even though it's on tape, still pleading not guilty. Let's listen.
Sure.
I would remind that one important constitutional freedom is the presumption of innocence, due process of law, due process in a courtroom, not on social media or the internet.
Even though it's on tape, could he still go unpunished?
Yeah, I mean, he could. It all depends on evidentiary rulings. I mean, we know because we're not sitting there as jurors, but the jurors may not get all the evidence. That tape may not come in. What happened before the encounter? There's so many. How many of us have sat down and said, oh, this person's definitely going to be guilty? And lo and behold, they're found not guilty. So you never know. But one thing I will tell you, though, what will resonate with this jury, whether you're right, left, center, wherever you are on the spectrum, the freedom of speech and your freedom to express yourself is such an inalienable right and something that is held so dear to everyone, wherever you are on the spectrum, that the jurors respond to it. If you're going to try to quiet people down, and wherever you are on the spectrum, it's a real problem. So
here's the victim.
prosecutors
I would not want to be his attorney. Good luck with that. Here's the victim's attorney on this.
It's outrageous that a young man who is exercising his